So
Yeah, we were just out for LBC stuff. So my
YouTube's working. I'll post the YouTube link on our Facebook page.
okay.
We're good.
I get it.
Okay, so we're good, John? Okay, good morning, welcome to our special city council meeting this morning, appreciate everybody's flexibility, we wanted to, I know 9 o'clock's a weird time, this will be posted everywhere. So we just wanted to, I think the goal today is, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, is kind of gather all the feedback, not all of us were able to attend all the community meetings. So I think that's kind of just gather the feedback, make sure we've all gone over it in public meeting, and then kind of go from there, decide the next steps or.
Yeah, Mayor, so Councilmember Orr responded that she was interested in discussing the community feedback that we received at the 3 open houses. And then Councilmember Henderson sent us a long list of things to talk about. So we're gonna go through, if it's all right with the council, we're gonna go through the public comment section first. And then Trevor and his magical computing machine back there has some models that we can run. And we talk about economic development, and housing and those kinds of things. And then we'll see where we go from there, if that's okay. You have a pack of papers in front of you. They are in order of the slides that we'll go through. The first community open house. So you have a typed version of planning's notes that they took during the meeting. You have the sign-in sheets of folks that attended. You have written comment forms if anyone submitted them. You all know these properties well at this point. We've been talking about them for a long time, so I'm not going to spend too much time there. This is just a quick view of what we're attempting to do here with the various properties. So let's start with the first community meeting, which was for the 5600 West property and the 126 South property. We had 108 postcard notices mailed and 31 individuals signed into the meeting. There could have been more people there, they just opted not to sign in. Some of the concerns that we heard mostly are listed there. That completion of a precast wall was really from the Miller Crossing Pod 1 neighborhood, which is the neighborhood just west of the fire station property on 126. If you drive by there, you'll see that they had maybe thought about starting a precast wall, but then somewhere in the middle stopped and did vinyl. So they had like these precast wall pillars with vinyl fencing in between them. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the concerns that neighborhood specifically had.
Can I ask you, did you guys look into that? Because somebody indicated it was part of their agreement.
So it wasn't part of their agreement. The agreement didn't speak to a precast wall at that location.
Planning Commission did.
Planning Commission required it with their planning commission approval. The agreement didn't have it, the city code didn't require that either. So in their plans that were submitted, they submitted plans exactly what was built, and that's what was approved by the city. It was masonry columns with vinyl fence between them.
Okay, thank you.
That neighborhood also was requesting fewer lots. There are 11 lots proposed in that area, with larger setbacks, and requested single-story homes on the 126 South property. On the 5600 West property, there were concerns with the fire station and possible noise that may come from the fire station. Questions regarding sales tax revenue, property tax implications. We did have a request for pickleball, like we usually do. And concerns regarding density, traffic, increased crime, and negative community impact. You'll see that across all 3 open houses, and concerns over quality of life. Do you have any additional questions on that one?
Other than traffic, crime, that kind of stuff, what particular items did you hear related to quality of life? Like how was that defined, or was it just generalized term?
Pretty general. I think density and traffic are probably the biggest concerns that folks have. across all of the community open houses. People, especially if they've lived next to an open space for a long time, they like to see it remain an open space, right? So I think that's quality of life issue for those people, right?
And concern next to agricultural properties,
Yes.
and then concern that if this is step one, to then more density deeper into that, cause beyond that is another empty.
Big parcel.
So, kind of
Just
the rip-
west,
kind
just
of the
west of
potential
5600
ripple
west.
effect of
Yeah,
that.
I think another consensus was it was much different than anything else in the area. So even across the street, that's way less dense and
It's a different type, yeah. I
it's.
mean, where we're talking
The
8 or
Walker.
11 units or
The Walker.
just over here, the
The
Walker
Walker.
property?
But
is
you go
that- I
across
mean-
the street, it's far less dense.
There's a lot of different parcels, right? And so, I'm trying to, I think I know the answers to some of these, but just for the purposes of this meeting.
Right.
I'm trying to, I'd like to see if we can articulate quality of life. This is one of the things you
Yeah.
and I have talked about a pet
Define
peeve
it.
is people say, well, it's a quality of life issue. Well, what does that mean, right? And so if it is, they're opposed to a housing type, or they're opposed to, a transition between their property and another kind of property, changing of open space, is it, traffic impacts inside the neighborhood on the, connector roads in between, is it, like all of those things are easy to understand concerns. I'm just trying to figure out, do they apply to one parcel, to all the parcels, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and I know that maybe is getting a little thing, but if we're talking about, the Walker parcel over here, this is obviously a different property, right? But, when they're talking about
This is-
density.
this is Walker.
Okay,
So we had those
The
meetings.
bottom
together.
section,
Walker
those
and-
two
got
together.
it, okay.
So the wall was really in that smaller, the
Yeah.
wall, and they would like a couple smaller lots. But the rest of this.
Yeah, that's what,
I think
okay, so it's
generally
kind of
was on
blending
the
a couple
Walker.
things together,
Yes,
okay.
cause we had those community
Okay.
meetings together.
Okay, maybe as we go through individual parcels, we can talk about what the concerns for those might be, so we
Yeah.
can.
I know in one of the meetings, specifically someone kept saying, no high density, and like define. Because definition, even at the state's definition versus our definition, my definition is definitely
Yeah.
different than
I
that.
think 8 is high density, the state thinks it's
Not even-
194.
Well, so I asked him to define, and he said, detached housing would not be high density here. It has to be single family homes.
Okay.
So no apartments, no condos, no, duplexes, whatever, twin homes, whatever they call them now, townhomes. Anyway,
So it's not number of units as much as it is property type.
that was his
Housing type,
definition, when he kept
yeah,
saying
okay.
he didn't like, this high density, and I asked him to define that, because it's the same for us. I said, it's not disrespectful, I'm not trying to say it.
Right,
I
right.
just need to understand what your definition of that is. Same as when you say quality of life, my definition of quality of life versus maybe even people who live in Daybreak, right? It's like, oh, it's a little crunchy for me. But it's all different.
But some love it because they can walk everywhere
Love it.
and they have the amenities and they're paying through
Yeah.
HOAs or whatever that is, right?
Why it's so cool to have some diversity like that
Yeah,
in
yeah.
community so that it fits different people's definition of quality of life. But I
Yeah.
think primarily in all the things that I listen to, and traffic impact is the biggest thing I see, because that
It's
really
true.
does affect citizens' quality of life. I think the longer you have to sit in traffic, the longer you're away from home or the things you want to be doing.
And it depends on where you're at in your life about it, right?
Yeah.
Some people would rather just shut the door and be home and not worry about it.
Well, it's an interesting perspective, my father-in-law moved here from Portland, Oregon area a couple of years ago, and he's like, I can't believe how awesome the roads are, there's no traffic, everything's incredible, And then people who've lived out here for 20 years are like, this is the worst, we're living in Los Angeles, and it's a perspective thing somewhat. But that's why I'm asking the questions, right, and maybe we can just punt that a little bit, but as we're talking about individual decisions on specific parcels or lots, there's gonna be some different concerns there, right?
Right.
For sure.
And so I wanna make sure that maybe we get into that a little bit as we go through this, so.
Agreed.
So we can go through that, just from this meeting, some of the feedback you have on the sheet, we can go through some of those comments.
So Sam, as good as we're going, cause that's, we're on the Walker right now, I think we're basically on Walker right now.
Yeah.
So we're stop Walker.
So there's the 5600 West parcel, which is also referred to as Walker, it's about mid-page here.
Yep.
There's opposition to the number of units that was proposed, which at that time was 212. Concerns over traffic, which we talked about, especially on 5600 West, which we know that's a well-traveled road already. They'd like alternative solutions besides a road swap to support the complex. Concerns about increased crime, negative community impact from high density development. Request for project timeline and verification on community resource of residents of close plan. Preference for higher property taxes over living near high density development. And assurances that the new development will not be transitory, so apartments or rentals.
So I don't know, but it seems like part of the reason we require this, they have community meetings before they're doing the development is to see ways that we mitigate those problems, right? So like I would like to know how soon 5600 West is designed to fail and how much this would impact the timing in which it fails.
I did a kind of quick back of the envelope calculation on volume, size of the road, capacity, and it doesn't fail.
Even at peak hours, or is it?
That was just ADT. So, we probably need to do a more detailed traffic analysis, have the traffic engineer prepare a TIS for it, which would be required for any subdivision anyway. But just my basic analysis of looking at the master plan, it doesn't fail. It obviously gets more traffic because there's more homes on it, but it doesn't reach into the capacity of the road, it doesn't even come close.
Thank you.
I think that's something we should be clear when a resident says the road is failing or it's not working, it may be due to congestion where the road still, by engineering standards, has capacity to carry that traffic.
Right, cause our level, is it D, what do? E?
So we collect traffic impact fees to improve our roads, to maintain at least a level of service, D. We just don't.
Which, by state is.
So that's a state standard, so
Engineering
state-
standards and the public's appreciate, this opinion of what a good road is might be
Different?
different.
Well, it says also
That's
like the
surprising.
state has said, here's the standard you can collect to. So you couldn't set, if you wanted to set it to a level C or something higher,
You
the
couldn't
taxpayers
take that
would,
enough money,
then the city would have to pay for that, you couldn't collect it from the developer.
The difficult thing on that road is as you work toward Main Street, you have a school and you have an intersection right there, signalized intersection. And no matter, Bryce has tried, I've tried, every previous city engineer's tried, you can't solve school traffic. It's always going to fail during school pickup and drop off time, there's no way to solve that. And so people will see school traffic and associate that with this road's failing. But it's really the average over the day is the road's working, you just have this 15 to 30 minutes of pain in the morning. 8 months, 9 months out of the year.
Yeah. It seems like you have that payment during when people are getting off work and going to work too, cause
Yeah, the commute
you
traffic.
can't get in and out of the grocery store half the time, it takes you 10 minutes to get in and out of the grocery store parking lot, so.
As you get up to 5600 West down by Smiths, there are other issues.
And that's kind of to your point, kind of part of the bigger discussion is there may be peak hour congestion, kind of what was said, but we don't necessarily build 8 lanes just for the 1 hour of the day that we need it, right? We build it like Blake said, over an average of the day. So there will be delays in the peak hours, like going to work, coming home from work. But as far as we consider failing, it's reaching the road capacity and passing that, and that means it's not able to function.
Right, which is, I think, where people look at quality of life, that it's how long do I have to stay here in the times that I use this road? And when you have the volume of usage during those hours, to them it feels like it's a failure.
Right.
thank you.
All valid concerns.
Any more on these two properties, 126 or 5600 West Walker?
The only other point I would make from this, and this was a comment that was made there about they would prefer higher property taxes rather than having the density. The problem with it is, and hopefully they understood this, is we can't tax our residents enough to tax us out of this problem and still be able to live here. It's not reasonable. So we have to come up with some sort of solution besides say we're just gonna put a lot more taxes on people. I think that's my interpretation of the data that we've received.
I did a back of the napkin calculation just for the cost of the Main Street redoing, right? Just for the one-time cost of that reconstruction, was that a mile and a quarter or whatever it was?
Yeah.
Mile and a half, mile and a quarter. We would have to increase taxes 17 times over what it is now. So a 1,700% tax increase to pay for a mile and a quarter of road.
Yeah.
There's no tax increase that takes care of stuff. Like, that's, people just need to understand that's not possible. And, you know, you'd need, you know, $1 bajillion of sales tax revenue
How many zeros?
to do
is
that
that?
either. It's a lot. It's more than 212. But it's a lot as it, like, I just, there is a significant disconnect between where and how revenues are generated versus what the things actually cost to take care of.
Yep.
Those are very disparate issues that are complex and trying to figure out how to navigate that, right? And so when you've got a list of, you know, capital improvement projects that's, you know, what's 60, how many are there now? I don't even know. 70, 60, 50, I don't know. Big long list, right? And it's $400 million. And you're like, awesome, we got $3.2 million a year to spend on it. How long is that gonna take? It's gonna take, 150 years to get them all done.
And there probably won't be any added on that.
Yeah, no, we're not building or adding any new projects or new things, right? And so it's, the primary impetus between this whole discussion, right, is finding ways to increase tax revenue in the city without having to overtax the residents to take care of that. And that's the initial heart of this whole conversation. All of the ways in which we do that are certainly open for debate and, which levers you pull and where and how many and what properties and all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, there can't be much of a debate about the need for increased revenues of all kinds, including sales tax revenues, retail revenues, property tax revenues from commercial buildings, all of that stuff combined. So, just when people are like, why the heck are you guys even talking about this? That's a big part of the reason, right?
Yeah. I agree 100%. There were a lot of comments about, it's all for the money. You guys are just interested in the money. And it's like, well, the component of that is very true. We have to be able to figure out how to pay for infrastructure in our city. And it doesn't just grow on trees. But Teddy made another good point was, it's not just that, it's that we're taking all of our kids out of the community and relying on other communities to provide recreation areas for our kids. And it's like, is that fair? Is that right? Shouldn't Herriman have to provide for its own also? This is an opportunity for Herriman to provide, and
Well,
it serves both purposes, right? It helps with the tax revenue, and then it would also allow our kids to stay in our community and utilize our facilities rather than have to piggyback off of other communities' facilities.
yeah, and that's all, at this point, it's subjective without studies, right? But if you have facilities in the city that provide services, recreation, education, employment, all of those kinds of things, theoretically, that's less traffic trips on the major connector roads and arterial roads that would hopefully decrease the traffic impact on it, right?
Yeah.
And so, are you increasing traffic in a neighborhood but decreasing traffic in the whole community, right? Those are, I'm not saying that I have a definitive answer for any of that, but it's definitely part of the discussion.
I'll do my best on a couple things. So the 126 property, about 2.5 acres. most of the concerns there will be addressed through planning commission process, right? Some of those things, I mean, the wall is something that, I mean, the planning, that infuriates me, the planning commission required it and somehow it didn't end up in the agreement. Yet another reason there's,
Do we know if it was talked about versus being in the motion?
The order of operations was the agreement was approved and didn't require it. Then they went to planning commission with their subdivision. And then planning commission required it. And I don't think they had the authority to require
they
it.
couldn't, after the fact, because it was
Because
out.
code couldn't require it and it wasn't in the MDA, so.
So that's still something that, those things can be,
Really frustrating for a person,
yeah,
right?
but they, that's my overall point, I'm sorry. And those that have been sick for the last 4 or 5 days.
So glad to be sitting next to you.
I know, I'm trying to keep that
Between
right
him
here.
and Todd, you don't
I
have,
know,
there's
we
no
don't have a
chance.
Those things can be, as part of the planning process, right, if, when it comes through, the other thing I've communicated to those folks is that will be happening whether the athletic complex happens or not, right? That's surplus property, it's been
Yeah.
many years that, I mean, it's almost as long as I've been involved in any of this, that we've never planned on building the fire station there, even though it was UFSA, was one of those things that when this area started to develop, with foresight, they purchased property that was available at the time, knowing there would be a station out this direction somewhere. And just like school districts in the city and other entities do, just because they own that property doesn't mean that's where the school's gonna be. The example I used was Bastion. It was originally supposed to be out over by my house. And the school district decided to swap it for that property and build it over there. And this is similar to that, so that 2.5 acres is surplus. It's gonna be sold and homes built there, whether this happens or not. And those concerns that they have is part of that process. So we just need to make sure we continue to communicate with them and as they go through that process.
Part of that, and after, some of those residents did come up after and ask if they could just buy the property.
Yeah, I mean, so if we don't move forward with this, then we go to that competitive bidding process, right? When we surplus it. When it comes to, I think the overall issue with units anywhere is, as I've said to a lot of people, is I don't think we the council would be even talking about this if we're just about building more units or just building a park or an athletic complex. It's all of the bigger issues at play. None of us wanna see a single residential unit, built anywhere, that we don't have to, so. I think the sentiment for most of us is we agree, and that's just part of this process and what we're gonna have to try to negotiate, and we'll see what we can and can't do.
Okay, ready for
Next
Creek
one,
Ridge?
let's go to Creek Ridge.
Open house?
Yep.
This one had 397 postcard notices mailed, and 38 individuals signed in. Again, there may have been more in attendance, but they chose not to sign in sheet. Their primary concerns, they also have a packet here in front of you. Of course, they were told Creek Ridge was going to be a park. Some people believe they pay more for the lot because of park proximity. So I mentioned they prefer a passive park to enjoy nature and wildlife instead of an athletic-based complex. If this does go in, some people mentioned they would like some sort of buffer between them and the new neighborhood, whether that be a smaller park, trail system, those types of things. Concerns surrounding light and noise, which you'll hear on the athletic complex discussion as well. Block view, density and traffic concerns, as we discussed previously. There were no handwritten. That's wrong, there were handwritten comments, sorry about that. There were no handwritten comments at the athletic complex. You have the handwritten comments here in your packet, if you'd like to read them. So that's incorrect, but, so those are there.
For the next meeting.
Yeah, it was the athletic complex.
Yeah, it was the athletic complex, we didn't have any comments. So any discussion on the Creek Ridge open house?
So the one, I have Lily Cathy in that Um,
Is that all?
I think so. They were, the park is interesting because they had moved there anticipating it was going to be a park to play. And, we're just simply saying we're gonna move it across the street. But in reality, when they think that it's, you're building an athletic complex across the street, it's not the same as having a neighborhood park that you run and play in, that this is gonna be, fields that people play on all the time. Nathan and I talked a little bit about, well, I would hope that we could find some corners that are not rectangular, that we could throw a play structure in that kids could play on. But because we've talked a lot about and it's not considered high density to lots of people, but when I drive through Creek Ridge, it's kind of intimidating to me. It's like tall and close everywhere, right?
Cotton fields.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, I just wonder where their outlet is to play. We talk about, we have lots of places throughout our city where we haven't provided good outlets for those kids to play. So where is their outlet to play if we don't put any kind of park by them, a more usable kid park?
So I think there's a quick answer to that, right? One, it's right next to the trail. And as part of that, there's an area of that that's, if you have pictures or if you were able to show it at that meeting, but as part of our agreement with SLR, is there's 1.5 acres on that western edge of the property that
The right of way
has,
to go
has
through.
No, it was intended to be commercial.
I think you're talking about on the other side of the canal, or
Oh.
not a canal, the
Oh, well,
drainage.
sorry.
Yeah, so there's the trail that wraps up around, and there's
On the
that.
backside.
It's on the west side.
Yeah, the
Oh,
back side of it there's an acre and a half or so as part of our agreement with SLR. They wanna make sure that we improve that as park space.
There's
So
still
there's that.
be.
And then there's the trail that connects to Jackson, so there's,
Okay, just have a curious, other than maybe grass versus turf, right? And painted lines or whatever versus, green grass. What's the primary design element difference between a big open park and this complex that would be so objectionable?
I think
Well,
just
it's-
programmable.
Programmable and rent, you're paying to use,
Yeah,
just like the raft.
it is not an open public park.
I got it, so no public will be able to use it at all for anything? You can't go over and run around the neighborhood with your
We haven't
kids?
decided that.
Yeah, that's to be
That's
decided.
something you have to.
Because it,
I'll say typically not, if you look at those types of complexes.
They lock them.
It's gated and locked and your primary purpose is for those users that are paying to use it.
got, and I can understand that, but that gives more validity to the concerns about
Sure.
no other park being around there, right?
Right.
And so,
So I don't want people to think it's one thing and it's not.
that's what I want to be clear about, right? We've got the 10 acre park over Mountain Ridge, right, the big thing. To me, it's just one big flat open piece of green grass, right? It's not really a park in my mind. I don't know what a park is, I guess, right?
Well, I think that's where these homeowners got sold on a piece of land that was potentially a park without a concept or design or any, I've even seen the sales brochures of what that company sold them on was a future park of 20 acres or 10 acre park, whatever it was publicized as, or 45 acre park, it was large.
But if I'm moving in, I'm envisioning play structures.
Agreed.
I'm envisioning.
And that's
a
what the
splash
reasonable
pad.
homeowner would
Absolutely,
expect.
100%.
No,
So-
even some of them were like, it doesn't matter even if it's grass, it's just open space next to us rather than.
And I think we can
housing.
supply or work something into that space, and I don't think it's a buffer or park or the west side where we've got that acre and a half of unusable land pretty much, but
I understand, like I'd be
Yeah.
tipped too.
Yeah.
But isn't there a little bit of a caveat emptor here, right? Like, hell, have you seen the pictures that we've been shown as a city council about stuff that's gonna happen on certain developments, and then it gets built and you're like,
It's watercolors and they spill
you're
water.
like, wow, those don't look anything like each other, you know?
Well, it's like coming here and looking at this, when you see all the land that annexed into South Jordan. If it was our place for work, you know, it was
Yeah,
our
yeah.
industrial zone and stuff like that. And so we brought that up at the meeting, that we understand, but things change, cause if you come and look at this, even on our plan, it shows that they're gonna get a park there.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's a big change to them, but again, it's like you said, it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, like, I get it, I'd be ticked too, but
And one of the things
I don't know
Literally
what
my
it-
backyard and those folks were in my week when I moved in and I told them flat out, and this is going back, more than 8 years ago, don't count on a park being there.
So one of the things the NDA, we wanted this large piece of property. And then so it's 40 plus acres, but then when you get into the details of that development agreement, again, approved back in 2015, 16, sometime around there. There's only about 34 acres actually in the park. The city had accepted about all the well, not even the drainage, no, it's like the park strips and stuff like, there's a bunch of property under the power corridor that is part of the open space, so it's not really usable as a park. But it was all part of that, so when people hear 40, I just want people to understand, it was never 40 acres in the park. I think we all had that, but as you get into the details of that MDA later and you start reading, you realize, oh, okay, so we accepted property they couldn't build as part of their open space.
It's actually about 28 acres is the park.
28 acres, so yeah, quite a bit
we've
less than
corrected
the
those
40.
kind of things in more recent development.
Yes,
agreements,
it's just,
but
that's one of those
that
ones,
happened
people
a
said
lot.
40 acres, we went out there the first time with 40 acres, again, with the regional athletic park, I think, was part of the idea originally, and we couldn't get it to fit.
And I will say, we brought up that we may not be able to afford to build a park there for years, and the residents honestly didn't have a problem with that. They're like, we'd rather wait 25 years than have houses there, like that was something that was mentioned, and so.
What's the proposal
I
of
get
those
it.
houses out there? 3rd acre?
No,
Matching.
They're
they
matching.
match Copperfield essentially.
Right now, it's part of, again,
Like, that's the proposal matches, yes.
I mean, what is
worst,
Copperfield's
so I keep
4.5,
saying
5
worst
units
case
an acre? What is it?
scenario.
Do you know off the top of your head?
They're,
I think their average
They're-
is like 7.
they're closer to that 8 units in
7
acre, which is that 4,500 square foot lots.
That's interesting to me though, cause in my mind, that's higher density.
But if they're
But
detached
people are saying
housing,
those are all detached housing, oh, well, that's
Yeah.
fine, and I'm like, I'm not sure that whether it's attached or detached really, other than an aesthetic choice, I don't necessarily know that it impacts density very much, you know?
And I
And so
don't
that's why I was asking definition, like, is it a property type or is it a density issue, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we heard a lot about density that night. It was mainly park
We were
versus,
promised a
park
park.
versus housing.
Yeah.
Yeah, cause these folks bought in at a specific density, they're comfortable with where
Yeah.
that neighborhood is, yeah.
but they also, some of them reported paying a premium. And if that's true or not true, I've heard both sides of the argument from the seller and the developer and the home buyers, so we're all salespeople at one time and we say a lot of things to sell a lot or a house, so.
Brings up a question, and maybe we could put this as an agenda item for another thing, is when developers or realtors are advertising things for sale in our community, that they need to put in some kind of a disclaimer that says these aren't guaranteed. I mean,
That's so
cause
We've
tough.
had this conversation.
no, because if they're getting a premium on a lot based on off of a picture, that's false advertising, right? There's no guarantee that's gonna happen. They can say current plan, subject to change, but even
can't.
just some kind of little asterisk or something.
And there
You
may have
can't-
been,
You can't sell something that someone else owns. They don't own it.
Exactly.
yeah, but you can sell the idea, I mean, people sell the idea all the time, so it's so tough. And there
Like
might
I
have
said,
been
we've had
disclaimers
this
or.
conversation, I don't know.
How do we, I bought in Daybreak and the idea was behind where I was, there was gonna be a big grocery store and all this stuff, and it turned into,
More houses.
426 foot tall condo things and you know, and office buildings, right? It never happened. And so it's like, did I feel like it was misrepresented? Sure, but that's what happens. Sorry, I don't mean to be sarcastic,
No,
those
it's
things are
fine.
monstrosities.
I'm just tired, It's only 9:30 in the
Only
morning.
Tuesday.
Agreed.
I agree.
It's just, God, okay.
Okay. The next meeting was a meeting specific for the athletic complex. 46 postcards were mailed, 4 individuals signed in. There were a few more there that did not sign in that I can recall. I believe, Mayor, maybe you remembered there were 3 people that attended the meeting that did not live in the area immediately, which was fine. Everybody was an open house, so
Right.
anyone could come.
They just hadn't known the ten, some of the others wanted to.
Yes, yeah.
They're still citizens.
Yes, absolutely. So again, some of the similar concerns, the density, increased traffic, lights, noise, parking, concerns regarding fencing, would prefer other amenities, a mix of amenities, not just athletic fields, and concerns about homeless individuals frequenting the park. Those were primarily the concerns. You have a list from planning in front of you that you're welcome to go through. For that meeting, there were no written comments at this meeting, not the previous meeting.
I would say this one mainly, there was the one gentleman to have the legitimate concerns about noise. Again, being sold, there's something different when there would be 1 acre lots across from him. But then I think a couple of the other people that were there referenced back to these other properties, so we actually talked more about, probably a little bit more about some Walker property and some of this, which rightfully so, so I think we addressed those in this other, but.
And he had great points, he's a former LA police officer. Parking, he doesn't want people parking in the neighborhood crossing through, and then the other guy that was there was from Blackridge, and I'm like, yes, let's not create another Blackridge. We don't want to do that to
From Blackridge.
council 15 years from now having to deal with the parking issue there. So we need to figure out that we make sure we put good provisions in there so it doesn't do that. We talked a lot about it would all be fenced, so it wouldn't make any sense to park in his neighborhood because you couldn't cut through anyway. You'd have to go all the way around, stuff like that, so we can mitigate that. There's no question about the fact that there's gonna be noise, and that's, I mean, I don't know how you mitigate certain things other than you use park hours, they can't have after these times, no amplification or things like that we'd have to put into it to try and minimize as much as possible the impacts it would have on them.
I'd say the handful of people I've heard from over there are actually supportive of the complex, but just concerned about mitigating those
Yeah.
sorts of things. I told them, it's literally around the corner for me, so I'm just as concerned about a lot of those things. But if this, and the phrase I've used is if this comes to fruition, absolutely go through all those things. And one thing I would tell them is what we've talked about already is there would absolutely be zero access through that neighborhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's access off of 64 and 6,000 and all the mitigation with the lights and noise and all those kinds of things would be taken into account. Quite frankly, it's a long ways down the road in that design process. We haven't designed anything other than just a
Concept.
conceptual,
Very high level.
just a conceptual layout sort of thing. So just like the 126 property, all that would be done in the design and planning phase. But I found it interesting though, the folks that literally live right up next to it. I haven't heard from anybody
He was one.
who's totally opposed to it being there. They just want to make sure all those things are taken into consideration.
I think there was, the 2 of them that were right back up into it, that were pretty opposed to it, that showed up. And mainly it was due to the noise and what they moved to that space because there wasn't a park, so it's just the opposite from Creek Ridge development. But, you can hear the high school, and that was their one complaint on Friday nights. But I can hear it at my house. I can hear Mountain Ridge from my house. So sometimes you can hear other high schools as well. And then you look and see who's doing fireworks, right? So it's really tough to mitigate those noises. So, you're gonna have those game weekends or those tournament weekends that are gonna come in, and you're gonna have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? Or whatever that looks like, so.
Yeah, there's no question it would. But I know, I can always tell when something's going on at Butterfield Park from my house, and I live over the hill from it. So, I mean, it's just the nature of what happened there.
And I might add all, truly legitimate concerns, I mean, I can't discount any of these at all.
Oh yeah, he also mentioned maybe, or someone, I can't remember, mentioned that even if there's gonna be big tournaments or something, you think you're gonna overflow the capacity of the parking to offer some sort of a shuttle service from the high school parking lot over, just so that it discourages people from parking on any of the streets.
And we looked, it was like 800 feet to the high school from the proposed entrance. So it's pretty, in proximity, it's fairly close. And it's doable. I don't know what that MOU looks like from parking at the high school or what that looks like, or.
Obviously, have
Parking.
skill district.
Yep.
Anyway, I agree, these are like details that are a ways down the road, but these are real concerns to people.
You know, you guys said something, and this is part of what I've been wrestling with as we've been talking about this whole process, right, is, you say these are all, legitimate, reasonable concerns, right? I get it, right? We all have concerns, like, when I moved into my house in Herriman over there, it was up against Mountain View Corridor. When I first moved in across the street over there, antelope running up and down, open fields, it's good for my blood pressure, life is great, right? And then it got turned into just,
Then you got on
wall-to-wall
campus.
houses and a high school and new roads and all that stuff and tons of traffic on Mountain View, and it wasn't so relaxing anymore. And I moved to a different house, I think about, like, somebody could come and say, I'm allergic to grass. It's a legitimate concern. Does that mean we shouldn't build a park?
We have had that happen actually.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
I don't like roads with traffic on it. So should we not build a road or not allow cars? I mean, you know what I mean? I'm not saying that they're not legitimate concerns, because they definitely impact these people's lives, and it's something that I think we need to talk about and consider and understand and do our best to address and stuff. But does a person's objection about a light or a kids playing in a tournament, does that mean we can't build it? And I'm not, that's not disregarding their complaint, but does that trump the interests of the rest of the city in trying to do this, So, again, I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I'm just saying, while we understand and acknowledge the, as you said, the legitimacy, which that's debatable, but, the reality of the concerns, right? And like you said, I can't just dismiss them. Well, I don't wanna dismiss any of them just out of hand,
Right,
right?
no.
But, there's a balancing act that we're trying to perform as a council, right? It's not just the residents here who we represent, but the residents of a whole city that we represent. And we have to balance all of those interests.
Well, I've said it in the community meetings, I think there's two of my value systems bumping up against each other in this, I get it, right, the density, I get the concerns I get every one of those concerns, that's,
Which is what we've been
You know,
fighting against for years,
that's what
so.
we did fight, all of us,
Yeah.
right, we ran on that, all of us campaigned on that. But then this other fight of financial stability long-term, those are two values that are hard, I mean, it's tough, somebody's gotta
Yeah.
give, somebody's gonna have to give, and
Yeah.
it's tough, it's not.
But to Steve's point, they're all valid concerns, and they're just things that's the reason that we have these meetings, is talk about it and take those into account as we try to move forward. And whatever form that is, and just be cognizant of those things as we go and do everything that we can realistically. There's some things that, realistically you can't do, right?
Yeah.
A plus B doesn't equal C.
Well, and
sometimes.
it is a very unpleasant but fact of homeownership, right, in a certain areas. You buy a home in a certain place at a certain time, expecting that's what it's gonna be.
I need
Sure,
to,
you could get on her soapbox.
Yeah.
I need,
Right? Like
I need to bring a picture of my
what Herriman was 25 years
my
ago, right? Yeah,
backyard
right.
versus what
My
it is now.
backyard.
And so we expect the city to be exactly the same, and then 5 years or 10 years or 15 or 20 or 50 years or whatever it is, it changes. And that changes the impact on life. I don't know if it improves or degrades the quality of life, that's definitely a subjective thing, right? But, access to amenities and services and,
Paying for services.
right, and paying for those services and stuff like that is just as important as it is preserving the quality of life, however we want to define that for existing residents, right? As you're talking about, there are conflicting priorities, and our job as a council is to have to discuss and debate and navigate those conflicting ideas, right? And the problem is whenever there's those conflicting ideas, it's gonna be really hard to serve both interests equally, right? We can absolutely provide great tax revenue and amazing amenities and stuff for the city. And we can preserve all the open space and the greenery and the noise and no traffic and no impacts all at the same time. You can't do both, right? So somebody somewhere is gonna be disappointed in whatever that decision is. Either their property taxes are gonna go up to pay for stuff we couldn't generate, or, so
Yeah.
it's just noise at this point, but I'm just pointing out, these aren't easy decisions, right? And I'm not trying to sweep under the rug these concerns that are being raised, because they're important and they're things that we need to try to do our best to address. But we also have to take into consideration of a population of more than 60,000 people in a city, right?
That's going to be 100 plus.
Yeah, it's gonna be, whatever, 140 a bill has, is that the projection right now? Or
Less
something?
Just a little bit.
125, so, I don't know, a lot.
Trevor?
And you're
More
seeing-
than we have now,
More than we
right?
see now, you're seeing demographics, homes or household sizes are shrinking across the country. It's hitting Utah as well, the number of kids people are having, so we're pulling a lot of those estimates back. The state is pulling them back, the federal government is pulling them back. Anticipated that the country's population is gonna peak 2030, 2040, something like that, so that should already start decreasing. That doesn't mean you won't see growth in a place like this, if we're moving here, but we're just trying to be, so those original estimates, had household sizes at 4 and 5, and they're closer to 3
3.2.
and moving south.
Yeah.
As far as the parking at the athletic complex, I just wanna put a plug in there that I've been working really hard to highly influence Nate and Kyle that we need a trolley. So, I'm just saying, I'm working on mitigating that problem right now. It would have multiple uses. I've almost got Nate in there.
She looks for every opportunity to like that trolley.
It's the Yeti Express.
Yeti Express, yes.
We won our mascot pack from the Utah Hockey Club.
That's right.
We're
They
good.
can have it.
Until we get the same letter they got.
Jared's got PTSD from the year he wore the Yeti costume all year.
Yeah, we're not gonna monetize it.
I think to your point, Steve, that I agree with everything you said. I think that the reason I asked specifically to talk about these is because if they're in front of us, then we know how to best mitigate them as we're going through the process, if there's a way. Even like we were talking on 5600, there'll have to be another stoplight in there, things like that will mitigate the impact of some of the traffic flow. So anyway, just knowing those kinds of things and presenting them to the public, just to show that because we can't make everyone happy. There's
A quick scroll on mention, as I talked with several of the residents in that neighborhood, obviously not the ones that are right there, but where the one road to the park is walled off, many of them have said, why don't you open that would take traffic off of,
Right.
the neighborhood roads to the park, but it's great.
Yeah,
But
and
it was always planned to open up at some point in time. They just,
But the city put a wall there, so
Yeah.
people who own those houses, right, so that's the thing, is that to illustrate your point, right, what's good? What is somebody's ideal solution?
My kids can play in
Is
front of
the
these
abso-
barriers because no cars go through.
Is the absolute
Yeah.
worst
for
for,
the next.
it's RV parking as well.
It's the same when 138th went through. It's great for traffic flow, but if I was the people in Bluffton on that dead end street for forever, I would be pretty mad.
Well, it's the same thing we had on 134th.
Exactly.
134th
Narrow
punched
community.
through and you had houses that it's been a dead end street, no traffic on
Forever.
it, now we have traffic and
And the growing pains there.
Utahns like to drive a little faster.
God, this is,
I don't know why we do it, but we do.
That's just,
Yeah.
just a recommended
I
speed.
mean, my summation is that,
Red lights here.
I mean, the reason we do these meetings is to get that feedback and have this conversation and have this in front of us as we proceed. Most communities don't do what we just did. They just proceed with what they're doing and we tell people afterwards. So as we, I mean, really for public consumption, right? We're taking all this information and now we're going into the thick of negotiating to see if we can find a way to do this or not.
well, and Jared, I don't wanna put you on the spot, cause I know your energy level's low. This'll make you roll your eyes,
Can you
right?
tell?
But I think that if I'm a resident, the question I'm gonna ask is, how are you taking care of my concern? Right? I'm expressing to you, I've got a problem. I'm expressing to you that if you make these decisions, it's gonna negatively impact me, right? This proposal negatively impacts me in these ways, right? And that's what I'm asking. I want to enumerate and articulate the ways that these things are negatively impacting quality of life, or how they're interpreting this is gonna impact their quality of life. But in doing that, if we make a decision that doesn't solve that individual's problem, how do we address the idea that they feel like they're not being heard? Or how do we address the idea that they feel like this is a foregone conclusion and we're not considering what their issues are, right? How do we address that to the public, right? That's a legitimate feeling that most constituents have with their representatives at all levels of government, right? You're not listening to us, you're just doing whatever, right? That's part of why we got involved. We didn't feel like we were being represented on issues that were important to us. How do we make our residents understand and feel that, even if some of those decisions do negatively impact them, right?
You know, if anybody has an answer to that one, I mean, you used a couple of words there, how do you make them? You don't.
Yeah, sure, fair.
You don't make anyone understand anything and then the other word you used is feelings. We're talking about emotion, right? That's a difficult
Agreed?
gap to bridge. The only thing we can do is go through this process and acknowledge those things and in the end, whatever decisions are made, as we always do, explain how we came to those decisions. I made this comment, I think in our last meeting, and I'll continue to anybody I talk to. Somebody made this comment to me, I hope you listen to us. Well, hopefully, if you're paying attention to this process, yes, we're listening and we're taking these things into account. But when we make a decision and weigh pros and cons and compromises and try to come to a solution that fits most, right, we're never gonna make everyone happy. Just because we made a decision that doesn't satisfy everything you want, doesn't mean we didn't listen, right? Just, if I don't agree with you, that doesn't mean that I didn't listen to you and try to understand where you're coming from.
But that's the toughest part. You can say they have 10 items, you can knock off 7 of them. Having those 3 outstanding, it's still detrimental to them on their feelings and in their view, right? And so
We'll do our best is
Yeah.
my only answer.
And none of ours are gonna get all our checks list done out of the 5 of us. And that's the big thing too, is and we're all struggling with this decision on, is this the right way, is this the right path, is this the right time?
I'm just thinking about, you guys remember that community meeting we had with the county? When
We're covered now.
Yeah.
McAdams and the whole crew came
Well,
out
that
and they
was the
set
very
up on the
first one.
stage and, you know, there were thousands of people, right? I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of comments. Most of us made pretty impassioned and well-researched, documented counter arguments to this thing over, many months and multiple meetings. We went downtown and met with those, went to the meetings where the county was deciding. And all along, we felt like it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what we say, it doesn't matter what we do, it's all gonna go through. And it did.
Well, their attitude towards us reflected that.
Oh, yeah, I mean-
I'll never forget Max Burdick saying after all, and right after all of that, and really during it, I think you'll like it.
Yeah.
I'll never forget him saying that. I think you'll like it. Just basically poo-pooed everything.
Yeah.
You don't understand.
Or
You'll like it, trust me.
we would say things and they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. That's a lie. Remember that? We were told some of the things we were saying were false, right?
So we understand.
Yeah.
We really do.
And so I guess I'm trying to do better as a representative than I felt like my representatives did for me. And that's the thing, I mean, like, we've had residents ask us to meet with them, right? Sit down and have conversations and hear their concerns and address those things. And I still would assert that all of us remain open to have those meetings and continue to talk and listen and hear. And I think that we will do our best to address and mediate and find compromises and negotiations and, solutions to as many of the issues as we can. But, I mean, some of these are contradictory to each other, right? Some, one that I just thought there was, we want a large open park without a field, we just want a park. And then some people, and we want it open to the public, so no fences. And then somebody else is saying, well, we don't want any homeless people in the park.
Put 8-foot fences.
Right, yeah, put fences around it and lock it up, so you understand that there's conflicting priorities even among the residents and what their concerns are. We can't, solving one causes another, right? And I this is more just a philosophical comment than it is anything else, right? But damn, this is hard, right?
Okay, well, let's go on to
I
the,
just have one more comment.
Okay, sorry.
And it doesn't even mean that we disagree with them if we make a decision for it, cause I agree 1,000 times with the impact of traffic.
Yeah.
We all have to drive it, if I can make a decision that would say we don't have any more increases in traffic in Harriman, done. But it's not, there's just so many other complexities to it, it just doesn't work that way, so it's not, even that we disagree with you.
And I guess I just hope that when we make a decision, our explanations, while could be disagreed with, that at least we're being complete and expressing and acknowledging and understanding as many of these things as we can, right? Why we made a decision one way versus another way. I think that's important to continue that circle of communication with the constituents, right?
Yes. So we're gonna transition over to Trevor. He's done some modeling on hotel usage that could come with an athletic complex as well as an economic development model we can talk about. He uses actual data. I use this. Which is the southern version of the Magic 8 Ball, so.
Does it say bless your heart in there?
It does.
Awesome.
So we'll turn the time over to Trevor and he can walk you through some of the economic discussions.
Morning, everybody.
morning, Trevor.
Good morning.
Start with the hotels. I recognize that there is a larger economic impact that we foresee with the athletic complex coming in, and we'll get to that larger potential impact on sales tax revenue to the city later. But I wanted to start with, I guess with the hotels, because there's a regional impact, I guess, in creating the complex, we're positioning ourselves as a destination for these larger regional tournaments to come, and the attendance will drive demand for goods and services within the city. And hotels are subject, in my mind at least, to the cap of how many hotels we will actually have within the city itself. Like, certainly there will be, you know, tournament attendees who are staying nearby in South Jordan, maybe in Bluffdale and Riverton. I don't know exactly how large that region will be, but for purposes of this discussion, I wanted to just take the narrower slice of how many hotels we feasibly see being stood up within the city and just like what the direct capture could be. I guess as the biggest grain of salt here, all of this is guesswork. The assumptions are based in some form of possible reality, but happy to change numbers and move things around as you want to, if there are other scenarios you want to explore. So, just to begin with, in speaking with folks, Sandra and Blake, as far as economic development, in that column without complex, we're anticipating 2 hotels coming into the city, maybe. I think there's, you know, for sure 1, and possibly 1 or 2 more that would come in, with or without the complex. As to the question of how much sooner they come in, I took no stab at that, because that is, in my mind, wrecking ball territory. Just shake that thing and maybe it'll happen, maybe it
This is
won't.
the wrecking ball.
Sorry, that
A wrecking.
and so in order to kind of just give us some comparison, it's really kind of a scenario where the complex doesn't, you know, we don't move forward with it and we just look at kind of how things would develop in that scenario and then with it. But as to the timing piece, again, I didn't really make an attempt to do that. But you can, of course, kind of extrapolate out and say, hey, if this thing comes in a few years sooner, then that much sooner we'll see this impact on revenues. Okay, so given all of that, here's kind of the 2 hotels without the complex versus if there are only 2 with the complex. Just working through kind of an occupancy rate with what I'm calling annual baseline room demand, because the point being that if a hotel comes, if there aren't any tournaments, we still would expect to capture, you know, is it transit room tax or? Yeah, that, the TRT, we would expect to capture that for any and every stay within the city, which is great. It's one of the arguments for having a hotel within the city. And then as you work down through this section here, we do have with the complex, obviously, that occupancy rate, you know, just anecdotally, it seems like when you go to these, you know, cities that have these facilities and you're trying to find a room for, you know, your family for the tournament weekend, you better book way in advance because they will be booked to the max. And so I don't see it as unreasonable for those tournament nights to push the occupancy rate to 100%, generating, you know, annual tournament room demand in excess of the baseline demand to this figure here. And so, you know, just kind of working through, again, we're talking about the tax revenue to the city, based on those baseline and tournament nights, coming down to a bottom line of about $7,600 more per year, or that difference being 10% higher with the complex versus without. I'll stop there, pause for any discussion or questions.
So even last Tuesday, we were at a ribbon cutting, and I got a visit with the GM from Rio Tinto currently, and he's excited for hotels because of their staff and their executives and whatnot. So even non-tournament nights, I think those will be increased numbers. But
I never wanna dominate. conversation, but the main thing is that, so when I run these scenarios, right, for clients, it's all based on assumptions, right? So the main underlying assumption is that we would have two no matter what, right? So there's a multiplier here as we talk to our commercial partners who are saying we could have several more locate here, this is here.
Yes.
Right, so it's not, so when I look at these and the numbers that we're really looking at driving this, it's not the 12 tournaments that make the difference, it's the 2 or 3 more hotels that locate here that we would have 0 versus that long number for each one, right? So it's not just the activity from complex, it's that they locate here anyway and receive 100% of that all year long because they chose to locate here. So this is a great baseline model to show like the revenue from a hotel.
So we can throw in, say if we bump it to 4 that come here and they are here because of the complex, so we put them into that section of the model. The change there now becomes, an extra 92.
Well, I think,
And so,
yeah, I think that it's a good key point to, well, in the future, maybe we have 4 hotels, possibly. We have 2 coming online potentially, for one for sure, one possibly. Is this complex gonna speed that up? Most definitely. What's the other services that come with hotels? Restaurants, right? Amenities, all those other auxiliary services that come with that.
So, look, I think the calculations are fine, right? I think it's a great, reasonable thing for us to be looking at stuff, but the reality is that a hotel, Big Flag isn't gonna come in and build a hotel if they're not gonna be expecting it to be 70% or better occupancy rate all the time, right?
Correct.
There needs to be enough demand to keep it at that rate all the time.
You're right.
To our point, we don't build roads for that 1 hour when it's busy. They don't build hotels just to make the revenue when there's a big event, right?
Right.
And so, how many hotels would that bring and what their occupancy rate would be and how many tournaments would that be and how long would it, all that kind of stuff. We need a much more in-depth, comprehensive analysis and study to determine that, right? But, I like the idea, but even still, let's talk about the reality of taxes, right? $100 million in additional tax revenue for sales tax revenue would produce $500,000 of sales tax revenue to the city. $500,000 is great, but that doesn't pay for Bobkiss, you know what I mean?
Pays for 2 plays per year.
Yeah, so $100 million in sales tax revenue doesn't really produce that. When it's a hotel, the percentage of tax that we get goes up, right? That's why it's really important. But, and this is what the case you've been making as a multiplier, right? Just the hotel revenue itself is important to understand and calculate. But then those people are gonna be going to the convenience store to buy sodas and get gas, right? And they're gonna be going to local restaurants to buy food while they're here. And they're going to go to, the pickleball place to recreate. And they're gonna go to the grocery store to buy stuff, And so having the amenity creates a multiplier of tax dollars being paid above and beyond just this. And I'm glad you didn't take a stab at that, because that's an insane effort to try and figure out. But that's why an understanding of an economic impact study is important here, right? Because showing somebody $100 million in revenue, that's incredible, that city's gonna make so much money. No, we're not.
Well, we do have a study from 2022, the previous one, so there's some data there.
Right.
But it's a
That
little
study was
slightly
a
different
regional
beast.
model.
Yeah.
This, Trevor's really dialed into the city specifically,
Yeah.
we were asked for that, and so
Yeah, and
Trevor's illustrated.
I have no problems with the model at all. I think it's a great exercise to be done, but even still, the baseline occupancy rate, is it 70, is it 80, is it 65?
It's
So
changed
the last
so
3
I can see
hotel
the
projects I've
difference.
worked on,
they've required at least 80% to even.
Okay, change it to
Yeah, yeah,
80%,
that's what I'm
if
saying,
that's the
70%,
requirement,
yeah.
change it to 80%.
Right? Still a lot,
That's with the 4 hotels.
that's with 4, but
So if
that's
you-
what I'm saying, if you do, if it's 2, right, go back to 2, and then look at the difference, it's gonna be negligible. Right,
Yeah,
2.5% difference with the complex, and see, that's the,
It's not,
it's not worth it.
I think you're-
Right.
the question is, does it create enough demand to push one more in? Because then you're collecting all the taxes throughout the year versus just the tournaments. And that's the piece that I think is difficult to project, because you don't know. Now we've got a Holiday Inn, that flag coming, we've talked to some other flags. You know, you have to, the numbers you would use is, there's something called the STAR report that hoteliers get that tells them how good a market is. But you can only do it if you're a hotelier. You don't give it, and you have to give your numbers, so that's not any information we can get.
And we know that Market Report, they do locate next to each other, right? And
Yeah.
those-
Yeah, 'cause it's the
those
center
of
other-
gas
Those
stations
other
across the
uses
street.
that are symbiotic in nature and all those sorts of things, but that is the next step, is that commercial report, and our commercial partners, right, are a big part of that.
And this is just sales tax, correct?
Sales and TR.
Sales and TRT.
TRT,
And
not
the sales.
property.
Yeah, and that's just hotel, not all those other things, and it's just sales tax. So the other part of it is understanding balanced land
Property
use.
tax of
The property tax that pays for those expensive guys, right? That we, quite frankly, to me, that, I mean, go into a long dissertation on this, but to have both of them and the speed at which it comes, having that balanced use, the other part of commercial property taxes they're paying 100%, right, versus roughly 50%, all those sorts of things, so, but to Steve's point, yeah, that's the next step.
And I think this is why I need data for all the decisions we make. That's why I'm so glad Trevor shares all this stuff, right? Is that it's hard for me to make a vote supporting an idea with the hope that it's gonna come out with some additional tax revenue and do all of the potential negative consequences for some residents, not for all, but for some residents, right? It's gonna negatively impact them. Say, hey, we're gonna go ahead and do this, and we're recognizing it's gonna negatively impact you. And the reason we're gonna do this is because we hope and pray maybe someday this could possibly benefit the city. That's a terrible rationalization, right?
Right.
I need to really understand that these are some realistic prognostications of what the impact of this is gonna be. And say, this kind of an economic impact to our city could justify making that kind of a decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I don't know what that number is, I don't know where that comes
Well, I think
in,
we're all agreed.
but a 2.4% additional sales tax revenue isn't enough.
Yeah, I agree. Chief, I have a question for you. If you have a chunk of property and it has a hotel on it versus you have the same chunk of property and it has the same type of density of apartments on it, what is, like, calls there? Do you know the difference between calls to a hotel versus calls to apartment complex?
I couldn't give you exacts, but I will tell you that the hotels create police service calls, right?
Probably depends on the flat,
It
type
depends
of
on the
hotel.
type, so you're gonna go to Embassy Suites a lot less than you're gonna go to Super 8,
Okay.
right, or Motel 6. However, you'll still go, and I worked in hotels, I was a director of security for Embassy Suites, and the cops still came. We still had to kick people out, there were still transient issues and those kind of things, but it was downtown, right? And so we know and I guess the best estimate I could probably draw for you is the perception that we're at the apartment complexes over on the north end of the city all the time. That's what I hear. And really, when you look at it, we're there, they create about 7 to 8% of our call load throughout the course of a year.
7 to 8%.
And that's a
Significant,
pretty
but-
substantial amount of calls. And I would think that a hotel will probably bring us similar,
About the same.
problems where we may see a 7, or I would say an 8 to 10% increase. But it's very hard, right, in a growing city versus somebody like Cottonwood Heights where all those numbers have been stable for years. We're looking at something that's growing everywhere. At the same time, we're trying to address calls for service and new builds and those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
Of a hotel, which we have no experience with in a hotel in Herriman City.
But I guess if you're kind of sixes on it, but then you get double the
Double the
tax.
property tax, yeah.
Property tax revenue to cover
That
costs,
covers
right?
part of the cost, yeah.
And we are expensive.
I know.
Yes.
You know, so yes, there is some equations in the police world, where they've done, studies with Walmart. And if you put a Walmart in the city, you buy a cop, right? That was kind of the
Yeah.
method they
Yeah.
were, versus another type of store where you may not, but, you know,
Speaking of expense, I saw a report on the news last night about the systems for the K-9 cars.
Mhm.
The heat systems, that the installation and outfitting of all of that was like $900,000 or something like that. I was like, holy smokes.
So
it's on a
certain
rent.
department?
Yeah, they said that the total cost of outfitting and upfitting everything for a K-9 unit was close to $1 million. 900 and something thousand is what they said. in the
Wonder how many
report.
units.
it would depend on.
Yeah, and I don't know, but
How
I
many
was like,
dogs you're talking about?
I was like,
Ours,
I think that was
we don't
the-
pay anywhere near that.
oh yeah, but I'm going, holy moly, right?
So our
Hey, you guys cost a lot of money, you know?
Outfit for a detective is less than a patrol, and patrol is less than a K-9. K-9's
Yeah.
our most expensive car we can build, but it's by a couple $1,000.
That's the case, I'm sorry, you can't have your dogs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's, we don't pay that.
No.
The dogs are expensive, but as a tool, they're very
Yeah, when
valuable.
you
They
need
are
them,
expensive
they're worth
to
their money,
get,
yeah.
but they're not that.
It's a couple thousand more on a build. But you're right, the containment uniform is very expensive, they call it a hot dog.
Yeah.
That opens the doors, turns on the lights,
The
pages
fans and the
officer.
emergency.
Right. But when you're
person.
talking about a $30,000 dog that could die in a car, it's
Yeah,
much
gotcha.
less expensive if the door's open.
Tesla did it for like $5. You
Yeah.
just push a button and dog mode.
Dog mode.
I guess it's interesting though, because it just highlights even the
Digress. So we
complexity
need
for
Teslas
Trevor.
instead of trucks.
Because if you think about even this, that would add maybe a potential little bit more more property tax revenue that we wouldn't get if it was an apartment building that would offset some of the costs, you know what I'm saying? There's just a lot of complexity when you try and determine exactly what the city is going to be able to, you know, the tax revenue that we're gonna gain from making this decision versus.
And Trevor, the value of the dollar going into this police taxing district would be at 100% for that piece of property, right, that hotel sits on, versus the apartment complex is
45%.
Well, it's 55.
55%.
But yeah,
So
you're
you have to consider that piece too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, so
And-
it becomes really complex, is all I'm just saying, another layer
Right.
of complexity.
It also comes with proper city planning where we've allocated this commercial space and maintained it and held it and had a vision.
But,
For that.
to my point, that in Olympia Hills, our commercial footprint is pretty small over time versus if we do more and more of this, then they can expand that to create more commercial, and which is, you know, maybe you would say, okay, this hotel replaced that bank of apartment building, kinda like with the auto mall, it was all that
I see your
commercial
point, yeah.
replaced some of the, and it's cost of service of long-term residential, but there's a cost to serve that too for not just police, for the city. Anyway, sorry,
But Sherry, I think there's gotta be an understanding of the role of government here, right? Is this idea of, in our efforts to increase revenue to pay for services, we are increasing the need for services that need to be paid for,
yeah,
Yeah.
right?
absolutely.
And, you know, that's,
Part of my reason for the question.
right, you know, you create an apartment complex that has a whole lot of people on a small area of land, right? You increase the property tax for that area of land, but you're increasing the need of service calls for there versus quarter acre residential lots, right? But, when we are talking about all of these complex issues of sales tax revenue, property tax revenue, and service levels that need to be maintained, and, you know, impacts on quality of life and stuff like that, man, sometimes I feel like, nope, we're good. Just stop all growth. Nobody can ever build another house. We never have to do anything. At least we know what the problem is and we can quantify it, right? And every new house that gets built, and every new road that gets built, and everything our neighboring communities do, and every new highway that gets constructed, and You know, every time you go from, 2 units an acre to 5 units an acre, or 5 units an acre to 10 units an acre, or you add another couple hundred units here, or you change a part, like, all of those things impact all of these decisions comprehensively, right? I mean, there's nothing that happens in a vacuum with any of this.
Yep.
And man, I'm just, like, as much as I appreciate this data, it's so early in the process and it's not insignificant to consider, but the impact of this data on any of my decision right now is close to nothing.
Right.
You did a good job.
Sorry, Joe. I think it's great,
Great.
but it's not moving any levers for me right
So,
now.
so as we talked about this is a really
Sorry.
hard analysis, cause it's like, what's your confidence level?
Yeah.
60%?
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, it's above a coin flip, but not much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At this point, we just don't have data to,
But at these community meetings, that was something several residents asked me even after was, where's your data?
Well, I think some of it because we put up the 22 and the regional, and they're like $26 million. Yeah, that's a regional impact. How much will we capture here? A percentage of that. And so,
Well, and Sports Salt Lake is gonna try to, cause they've got this, so they're gonna try to get us some data.
Invictus is waiting to update our study.
Like I said, just the commercial entities will provide.
and those analysis will probably be at regional levels, cause that's where the data exists. Coming into to Harriman at this level because of the nature of the way our community lines, it would be, I think it's almost impossible to say, well, you can come up with percentages and guesstimates, but to say this is what the city's gonna get with any level of certainty is pretty, yeah.
plus without the amenities being here, the hotels, the access, the other stuff, so.
Okay, so is our next step,
You wanna talk about this?
You got more? Trevor?
No, I don't wanna
He's
talk
like,
about
I don't
it.
want
It doesn't matter.
We value you, Trevor. You're very good at what you do.
Did you guys bring the gold star stickers?
okay, so
Can
the
you
next
hold
step,
the presentation up, John? So it depends on what you wanna discuss at this point, whether you wanna talk about operations and maintenance. Nathan has some keys run models on for that.
I don't even know
I think
if that's
we're
part of
the
it,
athletic
yeah.
so
complex.
early for that.
Okay, if you wanna talk about future negotiations with property owners,
I think that's our next
then we need to probably recess into closed session, have those discussions.
I think that's our next step.
So it's really up to the council and how
Because
you wanna
that's-
drive the.
A lot of that's, I mean,
Like, it's hard to get speculation into it when we have some hard facts to decide before we get into a lot of that. Like, from my point of view, I mean,
Yeah, because
You apparently
we,
never.
we gotta know what people are asking and what some of these numbers are and where we have some room to negotiate,
None of it matters.
because none of the rest of that matters,
yeah.
So let's try and, as my old boss used to say, maybe we should slither before we crawl.
Fix one,
Right.
yeah, make one decision.
We're just barely beginning to start.
So I will say for public concept, those that are here, I think what we're doing, we wanted to get all this on the table, now we're gonna take all of that and now go into kind of our plans to negotiate with the developer on this, trying to take all this into account, and then, so that's where we'll go from there, so then at that point, we'll come back to the public with next steps at this point, so.
Yeah, I hope at some point that this meeting has demonstrated to the public, this is not a decided fact already. Because during this process, you should be able to tell clearly that there's a lot that we still are considering.
Sorry, Chair.
That's
Over
okay.
the bus.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming.
You're awesome at what you do.
Thank you to the residents that may have taken days off, so, so we appreciate everybody, so I will look for a motion now to go into a close based on, what's on there?
And then Jackie turned it down.
She didn't write it down, but it's D.
Is that where we're at?
Yeah.
Make a motion to temporarily recess city council meeting to go into closed meeting for the following purposes as provided in Utah State Code annotated section 52-4-205. Strategy session to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property, or to discuss a proposed development agreement, project proposal, or financing proposal related to the development of land owned by the city. Does that cover it, Todd?
Okay, motion by Steve, Marie, second by Sherry, Steve,
Yes.
Jared, Teddy,
Yes.
Sherry,
Yes,
oh, well, yes.
but I do have something funny to say, isn't it funny? It's kind of like being elected mayor pro tem, you're just elected.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, second.
exactly.
Motion taker.
And that and objecting to the consent agenda, right? Yeah.
Okay, so we will stay in here, we need Todd, we need Blake.
Thank you for being here.
I gotta run in here, unplug my phone, my computer died.
Computer don't lie.
Thanks, Marie.
I'll do it right.